Hello, hello. Please let me know if you can hear me. I am waiting for Tom to log in. Are you all there? Waiting for Thomas. Give me 1 second. Hello, Liz. I see some friendly names. Of course, I can't see. Oops. Okay, 1 more second. Let's see if Tom shows up. Otherwise, I'm going to invite him. So let me invite him. Where is Thomas Piper? Thomas Piper. Hey, he's coming. Hi, Kate. Hi, Berta. Good morning from California. I'm so jealous. Hi, Thomas.
Hi.
Can everybody hear us and see us? Some joinhas and waves? Yes? Okay. So should we start? Oi, Gil. Olha só, the things the quarantine does to you. So for people who don't know, we are in the same house, but in different rooms. And I just thought that because this week, tomorrow specifically, is my anniversary with New York. It's going to be 13 years since I've been in this city. And I can't really celebrate enjoying the city. So why not celebrate with my favorite New York guide who introduced me to so much of the city. And Thomas Piper is a filmmaker. He's been making documentaries for the last 20 years. And I will introduce him. Thomas, please interrupt me if I forget any of your favorite films. And please, guys, send questions and stuff like that. This is supposed to be a fun interview and not something super serious. But I'll start by saying, the other interesting thing that made me want to do this specific interview with my husband was the fact that last weekend his film on Pete Udolph, the landscape designer who did the High Line, was viewed by more than 1 million people. Thomas?
It had over a million views, but that could easily have been just a couple hundred people watching it over and over and over again. So it's hard to say how many people actually watch.
But still, 1 million views. And then
it's a lot.
It was on the Hauser and Wirth website, so that was pretty exciting. So here I'll go with a list of my favorite films that you've made. And the other interesting thing, like you studied engineering at Dartmouth, so that's something I would love for you to talk about, this transition. But some of my favorite documentaries you've made, either directing, shooting, or editing, were on Saul LeWitt and his wall drawings in the Mass MoCA. Ellsworth Kelly, a documentary on Ellsworth Kelly. Kiki Smith, the 50th anniversary of the Guggenheim building. The Diller, Scofidio, and Renfro that focused mostly on the High Line. So they are the architects who did the High Line and the work they did on renewing the Lincoln Center. Pete Udolph, the landscape artist who did the High Line too. Frank Stella, architects Stephen Hall, Tom Main, Peter Eisman, Jeannie Gang, and some Brazilians like Eduardo Almeida, who did the library at USP for the Brazilians. This is the Biblioteca da USP. And then also Beth Jobim and Renata Tassinari. And currently he's working on a film on Julie Meritu, one of my favorite artists, and Lowtech, the Italian architects based in New York who work on with a container, the shipping container as their starting point. I'm seeing Tom a little pixelated. Anyone else is seeing Tom a little pixelated? Let me know. Tom, to me you look very blurry.
Yeah, you look a little blurry too.
I wonder it's too many people doing a live in the same household.
We should speak to the other people doing live events.
Can you quickly go talk to the boys and tell them to get off the internet for a second? I think we really need guys. Hang in there. That's what happens when when the kids are also on the internet. Let's see. Thanks for being patient. And oh my God, both of us look blurry. Maybe you're not missing much with our quarantine faces. So let's see. Wait one more minute, okay? And ask lots of difficult questions when Tom comes back. Oh, he's back.
Oh, he's back. Shh.
Did they turn off the internet?
We'll see.
Yeah,
I mean,
no,
they turned off the, yeah, well, we'll see.
It's looking awful, but okay. Should we keep going or should we restart? Up to the viewers. I mean, to me, it's very blurry. Okay, let's go. Maybe it's supposed to be blurry. I don't know. It's all a dream. Thomas, so maybe why don't you start by talking about how was this the streaming on Hauser and Wirth, and how it maybe relates to the quarantine and new formats that people have to think about.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's like these things that you're doing as well. Like it's trying to recreate something that we can't do and up doing for the time being. And you know, the film had this amazing life of having not only having been in actual movie theaters, but then after that it was playing it kept going and playing for small garden clubs or for conferences or for libraries organizing screenings, or nonprofits would host events. And it just felt like it would be a shame for that to come to a halt and we can't get together anymore. And it seemed like because it had some appeal on that level, we could do virtual events that would feel and would be a way to bring people together virtually as we're separated. And Hauser and Wirth, you know, had the same. I mean, they're as well. I mean, they're trying to keep in touch with their audience, and you know, galleries, like they've been this place where you could come and see art, and now you can't go and see art, and so how can the art come to them? And this film had so much to do with their incredible place in Somerset. Found it would speak to their audience in particular around the world. I mean, to see how it and to see where was incredible.
Thomas, it's very bad, the connection. I'm not sure this is gonna work. Your voice is like a robot now. Do you want to try one more time telling your kids to get out of the internet? It's really bad. I'm so sorry, people.
I put a robot in.
Can you try? I don't know, because people are saying that the sound is bad. Maybe why don't you describe the film for those who didn't?
I'll check one more.
Maybe go there one more time and I'll describe the film while you go. One more try before people give up. So for people who haven't watched the film, it's so sad. Can you hear me? Should I just do a live? I think I'll do that. I'll do a live and then have Tom come sit with me. It would be so much more romantic. Okay, don't give up. Stay there. Let me see if I can convince him. 1 second. Thomas, come here. We'll do from the same camera. Okay, very romantic now. Come sit here, Thomas. So let me give up on your online version. Okay, can you sit closer? Oh my God, this is so funny. Woohoo! Okay, Here, you have to come here, otherwise it's too weird. Oh my God! Look, everybody's quarantining, but we can still hug.
This is not.
Okay.
This is.
Okay, so let me focus. Can you all see us and hear us now? Okay, great. You see? Just do it the old-fashioned way. So why don't you describe the film for people who didn't? It's like, why don't you describe the film for those who haven't watched, and maybe talk specifically about
leaving it.
Hmm?
Should we take turns leaving?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So why don't you describe the film?
Yes, the film that screened virtual screening. It's a film about the Dutch landscape designer Piet Oudolf, who is referred to often as the rock star of garden design, of landscape design. He's easily the most celebrated person working in gardens or landscapes today, I would say. And he did the High Line in New York, so that's probably the most well-known project, the Lurie Garden in Chicago, and now also this incredible garden for Hauser and Wirth in Somerset, which was what kind of became a little bit of the centerpiece of the film. It was about the making of that garden, and then we visited lots of other gardens of Piet's, and then chiefly, I think it's about his garden in Hummelo, in Holland, where he's from. So the film follows the seasons progression in these various gardens. You progress through the seasons, and it's meant to not necessarily be a guide to how to garden like Piet. It's meant to be more like an experience of what it's like to be in a garden of Piet's.
One of the funniest things, I've watched the film hundreds of times, but when it screens, in the end they open for questions, and people's questions are like, what plant was that on the second scene on the left? Because it's all gardeners wanting to know the tricks of gardening. But I think one interesting thing about the film to me is that sometimes when you watch a documentary, you expect a lecture, something that will be like, Piet was born in 1999 and then he did. And I feel like with your film, it doesn't feel very much like that. Would you want to talk a little bit about that?
No, I think it's mostly, it's that idea. I mean, I'm not a gardener. I wasn't a gardener before making the film. I always feel like I have to confess that, but I had been in Piet's gardens, the High Line here in New York, or the Lurie Garden in Chicago was the first one that I visited. And it was, the experience of being in one of his gardens is really moving in a way that feels different, even for someone who doesn't know necessarily what's happening in them, feels different than other public landscapes or gardens. And so that was it. That was the motivation. Like, I just thought if I could somehow find out a little bit more about what that is for myself, and then make a film that shares that or translates that into, so that people in an audience who maybe have never been to Piet's Gardens or can't get to Piet's Gardens or have been there many times could have the same experience. So it's less about, it's not meant to be biographical. It's not meant to be how to garden. It's meant to be an experience as much as anything else.
I just want to address some questions here. So someone says they love the supermarket scene, and I love it. The film basically starts with Piet buying cheese. And I think that connects to what Tom is saying, is kind of like, who gets to see Piet Oudolf buying cheese, and how his personality kind of shows as he does this kind of more mundane things. Ana Carmen asked how long it took to make the film, and I think you followed him for 4 years, right?
No, I mean, we shot over 2 years. I mean, early on, I wanted the idea of Piet. For people who don't know Piet's work, he's kind of one of the things he's really celebrated for is designing gardens for being enjoyed or experienced in fall, winter seasons that weren't typically thought of as garden seasons. And so instead of just thinking it's about being designed for the height of summer when all the flowers are in bloom, it's very much about what does a garden look like in November or December or January, February, here in the Northern Hemisphere. I mean, for you all in the Southern Hemisphere, you have no idea what winter is. But the idea of progressing through the seasons was an early, it just felt like that's how the film should go and be structured. And then the opportunity to spend each season in his gardens, but I kind of did a year of the seasons. And then once the film started to take a narrative shape, I realized like, oh, there's things that I would love for him to have said in winter versus spring, or maybe it would be nice to visit this garden in summer versus this one in the fall. And so I went back for another round of season. So it was 2 years of shooting over the course of, 2 bites at each season, basically.
And the other thing for people who maybe don't know Pete's work enough is that he really appreciates, as Tom said, like plants that are dead. He talks about that. He's like, if you say that, like I'm a gardener or a landscape artist who enjoy plants that are dead, you would think something's wrong. But there's a lot, I think, to me, of the poetry in the way Pete works, and then in the film too, is that it's about seeing beauty in the non-predictable things that so like it's not just beautiful to look at a garden during spring, but also when the leaves are falling, and he makes a parallel of our own existence and how he compares himself to fall, right? He thinks he is in a fall.
Yeah, I mean, he says that often about how the emotional, I mean, and another thing maybe that he talks a lot about in his work, and what people often, in the way in which they talk about his gardens, is that they have an emotional quotient as well. And there's an impact that you get that is not strictly visual, or not strictly, the beauty of the flat plants themselves. And so I think the idea that he talks about how some of that emotion comes from the fact that a garden goes through a full life cycle every year. So that in spring, plants come up. In summer, they are at their most vigorous, or beautiful, and then in fall and then winter, it's about decay. It's about sort of the downward slope of things. And then, but then they come back every year, and he makes this sort of poetic comparison, but then says, we won't, or he won't, or it's like our life cycle, but we ourselves individually don't come back every year. But he says he's in the late fall.
And I don't know if
life, but I think then he says September, and I think that's beautiful because there's a lot of time left.
And he looks, if you haven't seen the film, but they show a photo of Pete when he was younger, and he looks totally like David Bowie. So his spring was also very interesting. And then, so lots of questions here. In a way, time is also an element of composition in his gardens. It is, for sure, right?
Yeah, because it's all about it is very much about what happens through the seasons and extending that notion. So it's not just like there'll be bulbs in spring and roses in August, or whatever. It's as much about what every plant does and which plants come. I mean, what I learned an enormous amount about, and what I think is so astounding about Pete and plant people in general that really garden either in this way, or just anybody who gardens. I mean, the amount of knowledge you have to carry in your head about what plants will do, because it's not immediate. You don't put a plant in the ground and you say, okay, there it is. Like it has to grow and come, and then it goes through a whole cycle of how it grows. And to know that certain plants do well, I mean, certain plants flower at some certain times of year. I mean, that's one thing to sort of orchestrate the timing of when plants.
It's like composing, right?
Yeah. And then, so he talks a lot about how it's very much, it's less a composition as in painting. It's more compositional in like music, where it's about the what happens over time and as time passes.
And the repetitions too, right? One question that appeared very early on, and I liked because I was planning on asking that too, is how you got to Pete. Like, how did you decide to make a film about him, and the connection with the film you did before, which was on Diller Scofidio and Renfro, which, curiosity is, they did as I said, the Highline, the Lincoln Center, and they worked on the new MoMA. So when MoMA reopened in October, the project was Diller, Scofidio, and Renfro. So yeah, how you got to Pete?
Yeah, it was through the making of the film about Diller, Scofidio, and Renfro, which was specifically about their work on the High Line and the redesign of Lincoln Center here in New York. But I didn't actually, I spent a lot of time with Pete's plants on the High Line when I was shooting for that film, but I didn't actually meet Pete until after that film had finished. And I was introduced we sort of arranged to meet here when he came to New York through a mutual friend and contact in London, Christopher Woodward, who's the director of the Garden Museum now there. And it was just one of those things where we sort of hit it off. Enough to where he was entertaining the idea that I would come and shoot something. My initial thought was just really to kind of visit his garden in Hummelo and maybe just do something about that garden, because it still feels like, to me, if this idea of Pete being an artist, as an analogy, that feels very much like his studio in a way, where he's kind of testing ideas or pushing ideas further or trying things out and showcasing his ideas in a way that probably isn't as pure when he has to do it for clients or for large public projects. And but once I started shooting, it kept the potential for the story, and he as a character, he turns out to be an amazing character, and so that led to wanting to shoot more. And the
Somerset garden too, right, became kind of the...
Yeah, early on, I asked Pete if there was any project that he was working on that hadn't yet been planted, so that I could sort of see the drawings. We could see it through the whole process, from drawing to planting to hopefully seeing it mature a little bit, and that ended up being the project.
And Somerset, talk about, for people who don't know what Somerset is.
But Hauser and Wirth, the gallery, Swiss gallery that has locations. They have a big presence in New York and London, and now in Los Angeles. But they had acquired an old farm property in Bruton,
outskirts of
Somerset
London.
County, 2 hours or 2.5, 3 hours outside of London. And they just had, this incredible ambition or idea to turn it into a kind of destination, it's much more than just a gallery. It is also a place where art is shown and their artists are shown, but it also is a residency, an artist residency program. There's a restaurant, an incredible restaurant.
It's amazing when we're all allowed to travel again. You should all visit Somerset. It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
And here, I see Tom's mom just joined us, or maybe has been there, and my sister-in-law, whose birthday is tomorrow. Happy birthday, Tinka. And then maybe, why don't we talk a little bit about how, before we move on to other films that I wanted to talk about, why don't you tell that story of how you decided to be a filmmaker? Because Tom, so he graduated from being an engineer, born in New York, moves to San Francisco after college, and works with Windmill Powers.
Wind Power Company,
sorry,
yes.
Wind Power.
Yes.
My Portuguese is very
What
good
do
in
you
English.
say in Portuguese?
Energia eólica. Então, o Thomas trabalhava com energia eólica. Let's all go to Somerset. Yes. And then, the Roth Bar is amazing. So then after 10 years in California, he moved back to New York, and then started working, making documentaries. But talk about the Chantal Akerman story and explain who she is in case someone doesn't know.
The Roth Bar makes me want to tell the story of the music of the film, because it also means I can say something for the composer of the music for the film, my friend Charles Ganza. But the Roth Bar at Somerset is the bar. It's the restaurant, but the bar space itself, it was designed by the Dieter Roth Studio, with artists in the Hauser and Wirth stable. And
there's also one in New York.
They do the same, for a lot of the locations. And the design is like an incredible piece of art in and of itself, but it largely made from just a collection of odds and ends and pieces, and it's an incredible construction that it takes a different form in each location. But in the making of when I was there shooting, at some point I met some guys who were in the studio, including Oder Roth, who's the grandson of Dieter Roth, and an artist himself. And we were talking about music. They're from Iceland. I was talking about Icelandic music, and I was saying, I had some ideas for music for the film. And Oder Roth said, no, I have the guy who can do the music for the film for you. And I was expecting, like an introduction to some pop musician or something like that. But and part of the bar has these old TV monitors embedded in it, and on the monitors is looping video that the Roth studio shot of themselves, like up to sort of making the bar, making all these things, but also just like lighting things on fire or welding things together.
So just a parenthesis, the way it looks like how do you say, like everything looks like it's falling apart. It's just junk and old furniture, just for you to have a vision. And then parts of the bar are just little TVs, and that's where you found the musician, right?
Yeah, and Oder said, and then he just pointed to one of the monitors. And he said, that's the guy. And in the shot on the monitor at that moment was a guy who was just flat out, passed out on the floor of the studio or whatever, not taking a nap, but just lights out. And he was like,
was he drunk?
I mean, you presume what you want. But anyhow, he said, that's the guy. It didn't seem promising in the moment, but it turned out to be incredible. I mean, I think the music in the film, between what my friend Charlie Janza did, and then also David Janssen, who is the studio member who was passed out on the floor, did. I mean, that's an incredible part of the film.
So that's how you choose your
yes
soundtrack.
You get you get lucky sometimes. So yeah, anyhow, making films.
Back to Chantal Akerman.
No, I studied engineering, and I was working in San Francisco, and the wind power company went out of business, which used to happen a lot to wind power companies. And I don't know, I just had some idea that I just became fascinated with documentary films, and I thought, man, that looks really interesting. And something about like the chance to learn different things for different projects seemed like it had some appeal, but I was totally naive as to what it would actually entail doing. But it was being in San Francisco, it was like the first time I'd lived in a city. I mean, I was born in New York City, but I didn't grow up in the city. I grew up out in the suburbs, and getting to see, going to, like, I don't know, independent art house cinemas, whatever. So I saw some interesting films, and I got a chance to see Frederick Weissman speak. Frederick Weissman is a documentary filmmaker who is famous for making really observational films about institutions, he always says, but it runs the gamut. Like the first film he ever made was about a mental hospital in a mental institution outside of Boston. And he's made films about libraries or police department or, what's the opera in Paris called?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Paris
National Opera. The Ballet Comédie Française. And he made a film about Jackson Heights, Queens, here in New York. So they're usually 4 hours, 5 hours long. Anyhow, I saw a bunch of his films, and I thought they were great, and I saw him speak. And I remember him saying that someone said, well, how much research did you do before your first film to research the subject? And he said, I didn't do any research. Like the making of the film was the research. I just thought this is interesting, and so I'll.
Palais Garnier, someone asks, is that it? No, something else. Anyway.
Which I love the idea. I mean, I love the idea that you didn't have to do any work beforehand. That appealed to me. But so like even the film with Pete was a lot of
learning as you do.
Yeah, and just about what you
trying to catch what you discover and then translate, like, so that the viewing of the film is a little bit the experience of discovery, like a reenactment, a recreation of what I discovered along the way. Is
Yeah, you can tell that, especially I think in the Pete film, is very much about learning through you learning about him. You didn't talk about
Chantal Akerman, sorry. So yes, it was Frederick Weissman's insistence that you didn't have to do any work before making film. That was encouraging to me. And then Chantal Akerman is a Belgian filmmaker who, again, makes these very arty, very long films. And I had seen a couple of them. She came to San Francisco. I got a chance to see her speak, and she's very hilarious, charming. But she said something about the two most important qualities she felt like a filmmaker needed to have was to be a good storyteller and a good athlete. And so again, I was like, well, that's close enough. Maybe I can do this without really knowing what doing this meant. And I don't know, here I am doing it.
Yeah, so I love that story that, you need to be an athlete because there's all the physical work, but also a good storyteller. And I think Tom is a very good storyteller and athlete. So Elena's asking, when is the low-tech film going to be ready? You want to talk a little bit about low-tech and maybe
Yes.
give the visuals? So I already said that low-tech is an Italian duo of architects based in New York who build houses and spaces out of container, like shipping containers.
Yes, it's a small architecture studio and two Neapolitans who have been in New York since the 90s. And the lovely story they tell is of having come to New York or America really, and just they started driving. They were just fascinated with what they were seeing in this country versus southern Italy, and they were driving around New Jersey and seeing this like hyper industrial landscape with the oil refineries and all the sort of warehouse districts, and then they in New Jersey along the shore in Elizabeth and all up and down the coast there are these enormous container terminals for shipping, freight shipping, and they were able to. This was very much
and they're the empty containers after they here, or going out.
I mean, what they were able to do, so it's very much pre 9/11, is they could drive into one of these container depots where there's just stacks and stacks of containers. I mean, I think they go 8 high, 10 high or something.
It looks like a city.
And they were just like, they completely fell in love with how these building blocks, they're totally standardized, uniform shapes, but stacked in different ways, created these, and they talk about how it felt very urban, like, it was like a piazza or streets or an avenue, or they become buildings. And anyhow, so that was their kind of moment of falling in love with the container. And from then, I mean, container architecture is not unique anymore. It's not like they're the only people doing it, but I think they're generally recognized as having been at the forefront of it. And what I was attracted to, or what I found interesting, is that they do it in a way that they're really pushing what a container, how you can make architecture with this object. And it's about for them, it's not about the utility of the container expressly. It's more about the form and what can be done with that form, and how far can you push using that as a constraint.
It's also interesting the parallel between Piet Oudolf, who, as I said, or he said, and I'm repeating, is an exercise to see beauty in ugliness, or in something that you don't usually think of as beautiful. And I think the same happens with the container in the low-tech film, right? And maybe you can talk about what Giuseppe talks about in the beginning of the film, about it being the donkey of the global world.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I do think, I don't know that I was conscious of it at the time. I was really drawn to Pete's work, so I thought making a film about him would be fascinating, hopefully. And then I was been really drawn to Lotek's work for a long time, and thought the same, but without maybe thinking about what might be common between them. But I do think it's incredible having shot both films and listened to them as characters, and the way they talk about their work is they almost say the exact same things. I mean, there are moments that I have with Giuseppe and Ada, the two architects from Lotek, where they're literally talking about these industrial objects in the same way that Pete talks about plants, particularly plants as they die. I mean, they're not really dying, but as they become skeletal and seed heads and not flowers. And it's all, it's the same thing. It's all about this idea that maybe you can see something, we can see beauty in things that we'd never considered beautiful before. And how can you make people see that? And there's an amazing connection between their work and then to realize that maybe that's what what I find interesting is how, the ways in which we learn to see something differently.
Do you want to maybe talk about, because I think maybe it was one of your first films that I saw. No, I saw Ellsworth Kelly first, but Tom made a film about Sol LeWitt's wall drawings installation in Mass MoCA, which is a 25-year installation. So it's like long-term, but not permanent installation, right?
Yes.
Yes. And I thought it was very interesting when I remember you talking about this film and how is also part of seeing that process. Why don't you talk a little bit about how it felt to make the Sol LeWitt film?
That was different. I mean, it was interesting because Sol LeWitt had already passed away, so it wasn't.
He passed away in 2007.
He passed away in 2007. So the film was made very shortly after that, but we never shot with him, or we had started shooting after he passed away. So he was never in the film himself. There were audio recordings from an interview he did with Gary Garrels at San Francisco MoMA, SF MoMA. But it was very much about this particular huge installation of his work. So I can't remember the total number, 50 some odd wall drawings that were being installed at Mass MoCA in a whole new wing. I mean, Mass MoCA, if you've never been, is also an incredible place, but it's an old mill complex, which is very common in New England, these old mill buildings where it's typically like a huge sprawling complex of these old brick buildings that are 2 or 3 stories high, and they're huge, and they have these huge open spaces inside them. And at Mass MoCA, they took one of these mill complexes and turned it into a contemporary art museum where they're able to do huge, large-scale installations. And so they opened up a whole section of the museum that had never, or the mill that had never been part of the museum, expressly to show these wall drawings. And we were able to shoot the installation, the making of the wall drawings at Mass MoCA, and that was an incredible experience to see the work happening. Which, for people who don't know Sol's work, it's all about the work. It's
all about the instructions that he gives to his assistants or anyone who can do it.
Every piece. I mean, his work is the instructions to make the work. And so the work can be made any number of times by following the instructions to make the work. And
as he says it, the idea is the machine that makes the work.
And but it was also fascinating to all the people working on this particular installation. I mean, the LeWitt studio has a team of artists who work in the studio, and they're around the world, and they work in groups, so that if a commission for a piece, if someone buys a piece of Sol's in Germany, there is a team based in Europe that will go and install the work on the wall. I mean, it's not always walls, there's some sculptural work as well, but at that location. But in this case, all these teams came to Northwestern Massachusetts to do the installation specific for this, to do all these wall drawings. So it was great they were all interacting, which they don't always do, but also you could hear all these stories that they all knew Saul, they had all worked with him personally. So there was something really, even though he wasn't present, he was very much present.
Amazing. Is the image bad for everyone? Ana Rocha is saying that the image is bad. Let me know. If you can see us, send a thumbs up, and if you can't, just send something sad, like a sad face. Okay, so maybe Ana Rocha, try getting out and back in. Oh, a little bit. I don't know. Now we're in different Wi-Fi. Then it's blurry. I don't know what to do. Do you want to try and? I mean, for some people say it's okay. I think we'll keep going. Sorry, we're blurry. Quarantine reality. Tom is not blurry to me right now. A little blurry. Breaking up. Oh, I'm so sorry, friends. Uh-oh, getting worse. What do we do?
The more you talk about it, the worse it gets.
I will log out from my I will get my computer off the Wi-Fi, see if it helps. Go ahead. Okay, I'll continue.
I'm busy.
Very watercolors. Oh my God, that's depressing. It's like a Seurat painting. Okay, we're almost done.
Online school is still in session. That's the problem, all these kids.
I also wanted to talk about maybe Kiki's Myth, which you worked on with Vivian and Vincent Katz, and Ellsworth Kelly. Why don't you talk about when you did the film on Ellsworth Kelly and you went to Paris with him? That's one of my favorite things.
Yeah, that was a great experience. I mean, all these films, like the ability to spend time with the artists in a really intimate way. I mean, it's very small. So some of these films I made with a group called Checkerboard Film Foundation, and they produce films about American artists. And but the film like the Low Tech Project or with Pete Aldolf are independent projects of my own. But in both cases, in the independent projects, it really is just me alone shooting. But even in the Checkerboard films, it's a really small crew. So it's usually 2 of us, 3 of us at the most. So they feel, hopefully, like that kind of intimacy translates, and then you get the chance to then just go. So Ellsworth Kelly, his story as an artist sort of begins when after World War II, he stayed in Paris on the GI Bill, and that's really when he began painting. I mean, his career as a painter, I guess you could say, started.
And that's in the late 40s, right? Late 40s.
Yeah, early 50s, and he. So we went with Ellsworth back to Paris, and he took us around to show us kind of where he lived and some of the early inspirations for early paintings and places he would visit. And he told an incredible story about getting to visit Brancusi's studio, visiting Brancusi in his studio. And so we went to the at the Pompidou. There's the art museum in Paris, the Contemporary Art Museum in Paris. There's the Brancusi studio has been basically lifted from where it was and put into the plaza of the Pompidou, and you can go inside but you go inside and there's a glass cube around the studio, and you look at it through this glass cube,
but
Ellsworth Kelly gets allowed inside the glass cube, and then we, because we're shooting, also get to go inside the glass cube. And then he just, he's walking around. He was like
touching sculptures,
picking up pieces, and this poor woman, the curator, was frantically running behind him, like with white gloves, like rubbing everything off and stuff.
Pre-corona.
But it was incredible because he would talk about how that was his inspiration, and so much of his work owes to how much certain works owe to Brancusi, and it was so you get this I don't know, there's a real, and then that's hopefully, so again, it's not necessarily trying to explain what an artist does, but just it's meant to be there. You're spending time with them, I think, is really the idea, and you're revealing something about them and the work through just this kind of privileged time together.
And in a way, I think maybe that's a nice thing to go and talk about Kiki Smith. But my feeling is that you are such a good listener and kind of very good. How do you say when you observe things? You're very observador for the Brazilians. Anyways, he's very observador. And I think that when you do the film, especially with Kiki Smith, you can feel that. But it's basically like you're a fly on the wall, and she's just doing what she's doing. So why don't you talk a little bit about her studio and how that felt to see her work?
Incredible. I mean, she still, that's, you know, I would, when you were asking like, oh, so who's the favorite artist you worked with, or what's your favorite film? I mean, that one's still, even though it's one of the oldest, that was 2006, 2005.
And you worked on it, Vivian and Vincent Katz.
Yeah, I was so fortunate. Again, I mean, Vincent and Vivian were already starting on this project, and then they, because they had a relationship with Checkerboard Films, had contacted Ed Howard, who runs Checkerboard, and said, you know, we want to make this film about Kiki, but we need some help. And I was introduced to them, and we started working on it together, and it was an incredible. It was incredibly fun to work with them. I mean, they're amazing people, but with Kiki as well, because it's we again just sort of got into her world, and we would just go to her studio, which is her home. I mean, there's no separation, and we would go there once every couple of weeks over the course of an entire 6 months, I think it was. And she would never say what was happening, or it wasn't like, okay, today I'm going to do this. I mean, you just show up, and then she's working, and she's never not working. Like her hands, she's always making something, always making something. And so she would just talk and chat with us, but while work was getting made. And it was only, the best thing about that film was we only found out in real time as it was happening that she was doing all this work for this very big exhibition that she was going to do in Venice. That was it was happening at the same time as the Venice Biennale. And so that would have been, I don't know, it's just odd years or even years, I should know these things. But, and so then it became this culmination of all the work that we were witnessing being made. We realized it was actually all of a piece, and it was all part of a single show, and it was all going to go to Venice. And then we all went to Venice, and then we watched the installation of this thing, and it was incredible.
So to me, like as an art historian and art lover, and someone who likes to travel with Tom, I just love to imagine these trips, you know, like going to Paris with Ellsworth Kelly, and then to Venice with Kiki Smith, and then seeing, like when you did the Guggenheim, the anniversary of the building of Frank Lloyd Wright's Guggenheim building, you get to see like the museum when no one is there. So I think that's the most exciting part about your work. But because I think so many are, oh, minha madrinha, oi Beth, o amor é recíproco. But because there's so many Brazilians, a conexão tá boa, gente, mandem joinha. Is the connection good again? I see that some people are leaving the room, but I wanted to talk a little bit about Brazil, since we're Brazilians in the audience too, and maybe talk a little bit about Eduardo de Almeida, which was a commission from the Tassinari family, but also I wanted to end with your visit to Inhotim. So maybe talk about Eduardo, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, there's I made a trio of films on Brazilian artists in Portuguese. Not all of them in Portuguese, actually, but the first one was with
Beth Jobim,
which I think was actually what led to being able to do the film with Eduardo, because there was some sort of
connections, yeah.
Way to make films in Brazil, which was incredible. But the film about Eduardo was it was a chance for me to learn about Brazilian architecture, which is its own world. And it really is this incredible, I mean, there's lots of celebrated Brazilian architects, not least of all Oscar Niemeyer or Paulo Mendes da Rocha, but
Lina Bobardi.
But to learn the depth of it, and to be able to go visit these places.
And he was finishing the Biblioteca da USP.
And
The
yeah, similar to like with Pete, that he was actually working on a really major project, and this library at USP, and so being able to see it sort of come to life and shoot it as it was under construction, and have him be able to walk through the project and talk about it as it was being realized was incredible.
And he's
privilege.
super influenced by Frank Lloyd Wright, right? He considers himself a Wrightiano. And also the library has a lot of reference in the Beinecke, which is in Yale, right?
The library, yeah.
And Tom also did, Oi Vera, obrigada. And Thomas also made a film on one of the most, I think, legendary art historians, right? Vince Scully, who was a professor at Yale and taught every famous artist in the United States was a student of Vince Scully. So before time is up, why don't you talk about visiting Yoching, just to connect Pete Udo with Burle Marx? Why not?
Yes, that we went there
2008.
2008, and yeah, I mean, it's the same thing. It's to it's like making a film where you get to enter into somebody else's world and discover all these things in the moment. I mean, you're discovering them as you're shooting, as you're talking to the artists or talking to the subjects of the film. But getting the chance to like become familiar with Brazil, or to learn about Brazil. I mean, I had never set foot in the country prior to going there together, and to see, I mean, it's an entirely different world. Not only is the architecture that I learned so much about the architecture with Eduardo and that film, but it's to realize like there are these things that are influenced by Europe or America or the rest of the world, and you can recognize, I mean, there's a lot of sort of concrete construction in Brazilian architecture, but it's its own thing, and the landscaping, I mean, Burle Marx obviously is like
Big reference.
yeah, and somebody that the people the world over know by name, but to have gone to a place and to be in a landscape of his, like,
I don't know if he designed it, but there's something about it.
I was pretty sure of that. Now we have to redo this whole thing.
It's
No. Anyhow, but it's also just about the plants. I mean, you encounter plants in Brazil, and again, I'm not coming from being a plant person, but it's like it's another landscape altogether, and the things that make up that landscape are not the things that make up landscapes here. And
there's no seasons. Like if the Pete Udo film is all about the seasons,
yeah,
a movie on Burle Marx would be about the lack of seasons. But I think that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed. I'm sorry about all the pixelated and broken robotic voices. Thank you so much. I saw all the names that came up. I tried to wave, and I'm very excited you got to watch us. Thank you. This weird quarantine time where we connect over the phone. But hi, Julie. Hi, Lucy. But thanks again. And I just posted on my stories a link to whatever films you have on your Vimeo that are open. Some can be rented. Anyways, but yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for it's always fascinating to realize how we can connect or engage. I don't know, between the virtual screening and now this, it feels like we're filling the voids.
Yes. Okay. And I will definitely let you know if there is another streaming of the film.
Yes,
hopefully
there
soon.
will be, many more will happen for sure. And
oh, Renata has a question. Did Pete see the film and did he comment on it? He saw it hundreds of times.
He's seen it a bunch. Yeah, he's
very supportive.
Yeah, really complimentary. I mean, it's because often, I think there's this idea that it's people love it because it's about him, and he's very generous in saying that he enjoys it because of it as well, not just because it's about him. But
yeah, no, he was very generous. And his wife Anya, who appears in the film and talks about, what's the name of the plant they talk about? Because someone asked about your favorite.
Witch hazel, the hamamelis.
Hamamelis, witch hazel. Google it, witch hazel. It's the prettiest plant, and it's one of Pete's favorite. Yeah, Pete loves Tom and Tom loves Pete, and when they are both together, it's very sweet because they have their matching white hairs. I'm very soon going to be matching white hairs with this quarantine. But anyways, thanks again, everybody. I saw everybody there. Ana Biao, I saw Nina, I saw Liz, Camille Beniski. Thank you so much, guys. Happy birthday, Tinka. And Bel Gomez, if you're there, happy birthday on Thursday. Let's celebrate and party once this thing is over. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.